Fubar here, and today we are doing a complete breakdown of the skill tab system, telling you which skill tabs you should be prioritizing from my point of view, so that way this will help you know which ones to go through and whatnot. Okay, so this is going to cover the do's and don'ts. First, before we get into this, what you should be doing and not be doing is you should be focusing on your core ground officers and your core Air Force officers. This means six Air Force officers, 10 ground officers. So you have a solid officer pairing lineup all the way through. You're also going to want to have your defensive officer lineup so that way when you go offline or you're getting ready to be attacked, you have these officers there to defend your base. So there's only five defensive officers I would consider in the game. One of them is more of an offensive officer, but he has a defensive skill. So we're going to cover those officers real quick. Golden Eagle is the first one I was talking about that has one defensive skill, which is his fourth skill, which gives you a base damage resist buff of 10% when fully maxed out. And you can actually increase this by 20% through the skill sharing system. Tip of Spear I would use as a defensive officer because his tactical skill actually increases the damage of their troop and increases all firepower of all ground troops within the base while there. It may say within two map grids, but they're all inside base, so therefore they're all getting affected by this. Same can be said for Percy, but I would rather use Tip of Spear because he actually increases the prep time of the troop skills. Then we got Vox, as you guys all know. Then we got Steel Fighter, who is the other defensive officer. And the last defensive officer, in my opinion, is Thorn Countess. So, with that out of the way, now we're going to start talking about the skill tab system. So, as you can see, once you hit 75 days, you have all skill tabs opened. And this has been a recent change. Before then, it was 180 days and then 300 days. And it was weird. Okay. Now, my one gripe about the skill tab system, I want to get this out of the way before we start jumping into this, is that I wish that officers could share two skills and still be able to be utilized and have skills added on. Okay? Because currently in the game, there is not enough officers to fully utilize the skill tab system. That's why we are seeing such a large influx of new officers come into the game. So into the skill tab system we go. So before we start this, we're going to cover the info notice right here, and I'm going to break this down. It pretty much says if you are using an officer, okay, you put skill tabs on there, you cannot share his skills. All right, and if you have an officer deployed and you're sharing his skills with another officer, he cannot gain skills. The other thing to note here is that only special skills can be provided on the lead officer of the troop. So I'm going to say this again. Only special skills can be applied and used on the lead officer of a troop. Okay. So we're going to hop right into offense, okay? And as we go down this right here. Now, I'm going to show you right here. This says firepower, right? Firepower is actually an increment to determining damage. It does not directly influence damage. So 30% firepower is more like a 3% increase in damage. Okay? So how you determine your damage for your true damage value before buffs, research, skin sets, and camp buff, and all this other stuff is firepower multiplied by fire rate divided by accuracy, and that will be your true damage output before you apply all the buffs. Okay, so if I was going to be choosing skills to be put on my, say, Liberty, my Liberty Heli, right? I would stack skills that are going to be more beneficial to it. So as you can see right here, this is one of the most valuable skills in the game. It says increases damage of this officer's troop by 15%. So this means any skill which that any officer has that says officer's troop, it means it's universal. It will apply to all troops, okay, other than Air Force, okay? So understand that this right here is going to benefit you more than firepower because you're getting a 15% flat damage increase versus the 3% from the 30% firepower. So, with that said, we're going to now go down this line. So, as you can see, firepower, I wouldn't even use the firepower penetration damage. Now, this is a good one, but it is also a variable. So, if you're going to use this, you would use this on, I would recommend a Liberty helicopter or a Vanguard helicopter, not the Modder and not the ATG. The ATG does have great pen damage, but the reason why I wouldn't put it on there is because if you overpen a target, the damage is cut in half. This may boost that number a little bit higher, but it ain't going to be that much of a benefit. Now, here's a good example. Increases the damage dealt by officers' artillery to tanks and helicopters by 20%. Now, you see this right here. The keyword was officers' artillery, and the damage was aimed for tanks and helicopters. So if I was going to use Saber's skill here on another unit, I would actually recommend the ATG right here, where it's aimed to taking out heavily armored tanks, and it does fairly well against helicopters. And this would also be a variable for the rocket launcher unit and also the Marder howitzer and even the Liberty howitzer. So we're going to keep going down this list right here. Right here. Thorn Countess. Increases the damage of this officer's troop by 20% when fully maxed out. This is a very valuable skill, and this is one that I would use, and I recommend that if you ever see this right here, the damage increase for officer's troop, that is a priority skill that I would focus on maxing out as soon as possible. Again, this is another firepower skill, so I would ignore that. Now, this right here, Eruptor's offensive skill Bunker Strike, would be extremely important to be utilized on a Liberty howitzer, I feel, or a rocket launcher, and even a Marder howitzer. This will increase the damage when attacking fortifications. Again, another firepower, which I would not even use. And now this one, the blast radius of officers' artillery by 1% up to 6%. Okay, this skill right here, when it's max awakened, will do the 6%. But here's the thing: the only unit that actually does blast damage, blast radius on any unit would actually be in a rocket launcher. So this would actually help your RL increase the AOE damage, even though the AOE damage on an RL is very low. Again, this is another fortification buff, which I would use in conjunction with Eruptor, and very valuable skill for your howitzer, say your Marder or your Liberty or your RL between your officer pairings. Another firepower, but you see this one right here says officers infantry. I would not even use that. Another firepower buff, again, I wouldn't use that. And as we keep going down right here, this is a good one, Rope and Dope. This one is a greatly influenced for when you are using troops on defense, because it says right here, increases damage of this officer's troop by 35% when this officer is garrisoned in base. So that's a huge one. Another firepower which we would not utilize. Now this one is the same as Rope-a-Dope, which is called Encouraging from Vox. It is another garrison buff, damage buff for your troops in base. All right, here is another great one with Eye of Providence. This is similar to Eruptor and also Iron Bastion skill, where it's damage based on fortifications. So when we talk about fortifications, this means enemy player bases and the structures in the L4 conquest of Cairo. Okay, another firepower, another firepower. Ah, and here it is. This is another one for infantry, but this one increases skill damage for all officers in their troop. So this applies to both their aide and the leader. So this right here will give a skill damage buff of 30%. That is a big one, and that is one I would prioritize if you're running infantry. Normal attack damage. Okay, so there's been a lot of debate on this skill to be used in the skill tab tree, and this is one where this would be good if only you're using a fast firing troop. So that means infantry, light tank, and and also helicopters because they have the fastest fire rate out of all the game units in the game, and maybe even the MBT. But this would not. I would rather do the officer troop damage over normal attack damage because the other damage will also apply to skill damage down the road. See, this only applies to the non skill damage attack, so therefore that's why I would not put this up there as like a high priority. This one right here is very good because it's going to do normal attack damage and pen damage. But again, I would use this like on a Liberty heli or a Vanguard heli and the ATG because of the pen damage. Oh, I haven't unlocked these two skills, so I cannot view them in the skill tab system. I'll go back and look at them. This is another fortification damage, which is again still good. Now here's another garrison troop damage. Here is another officer troop damage, which is very, very good because it gives you that 15% flat damage buff rate. Another firepower, and another damage for officers troop by 15%. So let me explain. Most of this, the base officers in the game that when the game first came out, actually have this skill. So we got War Machine, we got White Wolf, we got Bloody Mary, we got Death Adder that have this skill, and also there is we also got Thorn Countess who has this skill, but she's not base. But as you can see, Death Adder's skill right there, and then his other skill right there is the pen buff. And this is another firepower buff, another damage to officers' troop to deal damage to tanks and helicopters, which is very valuable. And then here we go again, another officers' troop buff, troop damage buff, which is on Steel Fighter. Not a base officer, but it's still there. Very valuable. These are the ones that I would be prioritizing for your units. Here we go. We got another garrison buff, which is very important. Firepower buff, and another skill damage buff. These are very important skills. Oh, I accidentally exited out. I'm sorry. Now, we covered offensive on what I would prioritize. Now, we're going to go over to special because specials are a completely different animal in the game. And now they're all valuable, but there's some that are redundant. Okay. For example, Tiger Marauder, the field recovery skill. Spanner has it. Also, so does Bloody Mary, Winter Huntsman. This skill is the least valuable skill, in my opinion, for special. It is very useful if you're not running a infantry unit, because all infantry units have the field recovery built into them, so therefore it's useless to have on them. However, the also so does the Martyr Light, I mean medium, Martyr Medium, and also the Martyr MBT have field recovery, so this would not be valuable. So we're going to start from the top and work our way down. Critical strike special skills should be a priority focus because this is going to give you a chance to increase your damage in an attack by 150%, and that is a big number, and that will help you a lot. Now we're on to Berserker Bearer skill. Now this has a 30% chance of reducing your skill prep time by 1 second and can be triggered every 8 seconds. It's not a horrible skill, but it's not the best skill in the game. So yeah, I would not really prioritize that. Now we're on to Vox's You're on camera skill. When an officer troop attacks an enemy ground force troop, this attack has a 30% chance to inflict fatigue on a target for 4 seconds, reducing the target's firepower by 10% and can be triggered once every 4 seconds. That's a 30% firepower reduction when this is maxed out. And I really think that this skill is somewhat valuable, but not the most valuable one. I would not really highly prioritize it for being shared, but it is good for defense. Now we're on to Eye of Providence. This is probably one of the best arty unit special skills in the game, in my opinion. This is my opinion. When in an artillery troop, reduces skill prep time by 12.5% when maxed out for all officers in the troop. That is a huge number to reduce that by. That's going to reduce it by almost an entire second for the skill prep time. So from 8 seconds, it's going to go down a little bit more. Now we're on to, and I'm sorry for the cough. Now we're on to Whipcracker. Now this is one of the most valuable skills for MBT players and helicopter players in the game. This will increase the speed of this officer's tanks and helicopters by up to 10% of the, and then also increase the training speed by 10%. This would be best utilized on a helicopter or the modern MBT, I feel. Now her second special skill, when this officer's tank or helicopter troop is attacked by a skill, they have a 75% chance to reduce the damage taking and can be triggered once every 4 seconds. This is a huge skill, and this what this does is it gives you a skill damage reduction by 40%. That is huge with the survivability. Now this is an infantry one that actually is an officer's troop skill. When this officer's troop is attacked, it has a 30% chance to gain a shield of up to 500 coefficient for 2 seconds and can be triggered once every 8 seconds. So that is a pretty big number. This is going to help you effectively negate some damage with whatever unit you're using. And the I don't like the fact that it can be triggered only every 8 seconds. If it was every 4, it would be much more valuable, in my opinion. Maestro, painted shells. Each attack this officer's artillery troop stains the enemy troop, reducing the damage resist up to 15% for 6 seconds. If this troop is already stained, another enemy troop within one map grid will be stained instead. This skill can be triggered once every 2 seconds. Damage resist reduction, like I said before, will go up to 15%. This is insanely valuable, especially for you guys who are using rocket launchers. And the reason why is because if you move your rocket launcher over one square, you have a 2 second reload, and then you fire that off, and this will stain the other enemy troop, making it easier to wipe out enemy AG army groups. Peregrine Falcons. All right, increases officer's troop. It has a 4% chance of triggering a critical strike when attacked. Deals up to 150% damage. Right, it has goes this critical strike rate goes up to 10%. This is a big one because this one actually ties in with a defensive skill from Eri Kamamoto, who's right across, and it's pretty valuable. It's a very valuable skills pairing in the game, and I would prioritize that. Spanners is a field recovery. It's not that valuable because, like I said before, multiple officers have it, and it's not. It could be better utilized down the road. Then we got War Machine's load time reduction, which goes up to 10%, and it's also an officer's troop skill, so that means that it can be applied to any unit. Then we got Bloody Mary's speed of the speed. It's a speed increase for your troop speed buff. Goes up to 10%. It's a very valuable skill if you're using a slower unit, such as like the Martyr MBT It will not make a big difference on a super heavy unit, so don't worry about that. But it does help with light tanks, increase their speed a little bit more because their speed is their survivability, and same with helicopters. Another field recovery, not that valuable. Like I said before, another field recovery. Now, precision strike is one of the most valuable skills in the game, in my opinion, which only Valkyrie has. When this officer's tank or helicopter troop attacks an enemy ground force troop, the attack has a 20% chance to inflict sundered armor on the target for 4 seconds, reducing the target's damage resist by 20% and can be triggered once every 2 seconds. So it's a 20% damage resist. That's a huge. And it can be triggered every 2 seconds. It increases the damage of this officer's troop by 15% if this officer's troop is in a tank hunter or a helicopter troop. This skill also decreases the load time by 5%. Very valuable, but only tailored to a helicopter unit. Then another critical strike skill for our last skill right there. Now, I'm not going to cover all the pay to win officers because most people can't get them, but I will cover skills that you should focus on the pay to win officers. So that way you can just max out one officer at a time. Well, one skill at a time on an officer. Balance skills. Now, there's not many balance skills in the game, as you can see right here. And I would actually recommend maxing out all of them. These are great filler skills. They give you extra HP. I don't really care for the firepower, but it is there, and some of them actually do damage and damage resist, like Maestros, like I was pulling up right there. And most of the time, it's firepower and HP. Quick to note, Winter Huntsman's skill is the polar opposite of Death Adder's. So where Winter Huntsman's skill gives more firepower than HP, Death Adder's gives more HP than firepower, which is very unique. Now on to protection. Now I'm gonna make this real quick and easy. HP buffs should be used for your true. If you have Thorn Countess Awakened, should be put onto your strongest unit that has the most HP. So this would be Martyr Infantry, Martyr MBT, or a Vanguard MBT, Vanguard Super Heavy. The reason why is because the HP actually directly increases the shield and is multiplied by the shield coefficient. Okay? Now, other than that, the other two defensive skills that are, in my opinion, are most valuable is the troop damage resist, and only the second one only applies to infantry is blast damage resist. Reason why infantry already has a huge damage resist, especially when in bunker mode, but its blast damage resist is very, very low. Now, damage resist covers everything, but having that increase in blast damage resist is a big deal. So, as you can see right here, this is what I would be a priority for me. Another priority. Now, skill damage reduction, this would be a good priority, but it would be hard to utilize unless you're going to actually put this on a tanking unit. So like your SH or MBT that's going to be tanking a base. Another HP, another damage resist. Quick to note, there's only a few officers in the game that actually give you a 20% damage resist buff. Most of them actually give you only a 15, so that's food for thought. Another damage resist buff, HP for only infantry, and a blast damage resist buff. Now this one is another HP buff, but I would not prioritize this one because it reduces speed by 5%. Another HP buff for artillery, which is completely useless in my opinion. I would not use this at all. I would actually stack up skill damage reduction on that, maybe. Another damage resist buff of 20%. Another HP buff and a damage resist buff, which is 20% HP, 10% damage resist. another damage resist buff, and this one is an HP and blast damage resist buff, which is very valuable in my opinion for only infantry though. Another 20% damage resist buff, but only applies to tanks and helicopters. Very valuable. A 40% HP buff. This is a very valuable skill. Again, if you're using this only for increasing your base shield, I feel. This is the other skill to the special skill I was talking about of that was on Warrior Wiz. This is called Sparrows. So increases the damage resist of this officer's troop by 15%. When paired with an officer with Peregrine Falcon skill, their troop will also have a 4% chance to triggering a critical strike when attacking, dealing 150% damage. This is a very valuable skill because now you're increasing the 10% to 14% critical strike rate and you're gaining a 15% damage resist buff. So this is a very valuable skill. And a 30% HP buff, another 20% HP buff, a 50% blast damage resist buff, which is a very big deal, another 15% damage resist buff, a bunker damage resist buff, which is very valuable for only infantry. And now this is probably the most valuable protection skill in the game because it increases your base damage resist buff by 10% and gives you a 15% damage resist buff. And like I said before, you can share if you have him deployed and you share his skill to another officer. Now you have 20% base damage resist buff, another 50% blast damage resist buff, and a 15% HP and a 8% damage resist buff. Still very valuable because of the dual action there with no negative side effects. So this now has effectively covered all the ground force officers skill tabs. Okay, and now we're going to go over and talk about the pay to win officers. Now we already talked about Saber of the Nations skills, but we're going to cover Lady Liberty. Now, her second skill increases firepower. I wouldn't focus that. Now, shock and awe. This one right here, I would focus. If you're going to be working on a skill to just put on an artillery troop, this one I would do. The reason why is because its attacks has a 25% chance to silence enemy troops, which pauses the skill prep time for officer skills for 2 seconds, and it can be triggered every 4 seconds. This is very valuable and very overpowered if you can get that. So that means 4 seconds, right? So out of every 16 seconds, you're guaranteed a minimum by laws of probability of this triggering at least once. And as you can see from Valkyrie, she has a very much lower chance of triggering the damage resist reduction. So I think this would be very powerful. Now this is a damage buff when you gain damage when enemy troops have more HP than yourself. So this is meaning like you get actual more, you do more damage the lower your units you have in your unit. Now on to Professor Payne. His second special, whenever this troop is attacked, it has a 20% chance to recover HP. Up to 250 coefficient can be triggered once every 4 seconds. I heard this skill is not that great, but as you can see, I don't have him unlocked, so I can't really, or the skill unlocked, so I can't really test it. But I'm going to trust what my friends say and say do not prioritize this skill. It is a very unique skill, but I would not unlock it unless you already got Professor Payne already awakened. And you should be using Professor Payne if you have him awakened. He's a very OP officer. Now his balance skill I would definitely go after because it's 20% of both HP and firepower. And I would definitely go after his fourth, which increases skill damage of all officers in this officer's troop by 30%. That is a big deal. So if you're I want to give you an idea. If the standard damage rate of all free to play officers right now is 1500 damage coefficient, this means if you divide that by 4, all right, and you give it 30%, that means it will be slightly high, it will bring it up to roughly 1850 damage coefficient. And that's pretty big. Now we're on to Lord of Order. His second skill, this increases damage of this officer's troop by 20%, which is very big. When attacking an enemy with a shield, increases their troop damage by an extra 20%. So that is a huge one where we are going up against MBTs with shields, or so many units now with shields. This is going to be a very big deal. Now, on to this one right here, the special skill right here. If this officer is in a tank or helicopter troop, he gains a 30% bonus to HP and recovers 1% HP per second while in the field and not in combat. So, this is a very good skill, and it's an upgraded version of the field recovery skill, in my opinion. Now, I would only use this on a unit like a helicopter or, say, yeah, a helicopter or like a light tank. So, like a Liberty heli or a Vanguard heli or Martyr heli and light tanks, I would use that on. Or the Vanguard MBT or the Liberty MBT. He does a skill damage reduction for this officer's tanks and helicopters up to 30%, which is another valuable skill. Now we are on to the Air Force officers. Okay. So let's go and take a look at this. We're going to start with special skills. Okay. This should be much quicker going down the line because of how little Air Force officers we actually have. Now we're going to start with Silver Comets, no retreat. This officer's fighter plane has a 10% chance of landing a critical strike when it attacks, dealing 150% damage. I would prioritize this. I can't see Nagarami's. We'll come back to that after. I also got to go back to Warrior Wiz and Iri Kamamoto too because their skills are still locked too. So don't think I forgot about that. I will go back to those officers. Now we're on to Mystery Course from Witcher. It just increases the maneuverability of this officer's troop by 30%, by 20%. Now, to understand what maneuverability is, it's their chance to dodge an attack. So it's valuable, but not super valuable. It'd be more valuable on a modern fighter plane than anything else. Now, Golden Pixies is a stability buff, so it increases your accuracy of your bombs for your bombers, and that goes up to 20%. Now, Brisk Eagle gives you additional critical strike damage of the troop up to 50%, and she gives a patrol speed buff for your troop up to 10%. Then we're on to I think it's Wings of Glory, and it increases the jamming capability of this officer's fighter planes up to 20%. Now, jamming capability is decreases the accuracy of your bombers, so therefore that's what that skill directly does. Now, Rictus Reaper, me and 44 Mag have deemed him as the most useless officer in the exclusive lounge. However, his healing coefficient on a bomber is actually pretty good. So every time you drop a bomb and you manage to kill a unit, you actually gain HP back. So this is very good trying to when you're trying to gain air superiority over your opponents and your fighter planes are already engaged and your bombers going in and attacking artillery units or weaker tanks, and you're just taking a couple hits here and there. This HP recovery will help you survive a little bit longer, so that way you can quickly pull them out. Now, on to Rising Stars skill. It increases the maneuverability and the patrol speed of bombers. So that means you're going to be able to drop your bombs faster, and you're going to be able to dodge attacks more frequently, and this goes up to 10%. Polar Phantom increases the patrol speed of this officer's troop by 13% while not in combat. So that means you're going to be able to move to your destination quicker and back to base quicker. This is another patrol speed one of up to 10% by El Cartero. Not the most important one, but it is a valuable skill. Now on to Balanced. There's only one, and it is by Rising Star. And I think it's one of the more valuable ones for Air Force because it increases damage and damage resist by 10%. And it can be used on fighter planes and bombers. Now on to Protection. We're going to look over Nagarami because that skill is not unlocked. So I'm going to go there manually and look at them. So for Protection, you get a damage resist for Officer's Troop from Witcher. Very valuable. Definitely one I would focus. It's good for bombers and fighter planes. And then this one increases the Officer's Troop HP by 20%. Not as valuable. Now, Super Safeguard level 2. That's for me. I got it at level 2. This increases the damage resist of Officer's Troop by 10% while being attacked by a base up to 25%. This is a valuable skill for bombers because when you're bombing a target, whether you're on a Vanguard, Marauder, or Liberty bomber, you're going to be taking damage from bases if the AG or troops are near a base. So this is going to negate 25% of that damage. Well, not 25. It's going to increase your damage resist from that base by 25%. Now, his second skill is an HP increase for only fighter planes up to 30%. Then you got Rictus Reapers, damage resist for Officer's Troop up to 15%. This is another valuable skill from Rictus Reaper, but not the most valuable. Now we're on to an HP for fighter planes only by 30% from Polar Phantom. Not that valuable. And another 30% HP buff from Rictus Reaper, which is not that great for, and it only applies to bombers. However, Inferno's Lone Shadow is a very valuable one. This officer's troop gains a 90%, up to 30% damage resist when attacked by ground force troops in AA mode. So that means if you pair this with Heaven's Savior, damage resist from bases and this skill, you're going to be much more resistant to light tanks, ATGs, and bases, and it's very, very valuable and very, very solid. Now on to offense. So, one man army from Silver Comet. It increases the intercept of your fighter planes by 10% up to 35% when fully awakened. This is super useful when on a Vanguard fighter or a Liberty fighter plane. Now, the intercept is the amount of, is your first attack when engaging the enemy with a fighter plane. And you have to be the engager, not the one on the recipient side. That's not how it works. This fighter plane troop gains 50% firepower for 4 seconds after dodging an enemy attack. Goes up to 35. That's alright, not the greatest. Like I said, Nagarami, we can't view that. Another intercept increase buff. This is probably one of the more valuable skills coming from Heaven's Savior. So this is a very good skill to have. Now we got a damage increase by troop by 15% by Golden Pixie. This can go to either bombers or fighters. Insanely valuable. Definitely worth getting. Now, increases the firepower of this officer's bombers by 10%. Not the greatest, but it does go up to 30%. Then we got Golden Pixie, which increases firepower. I'm not Golden Pixie, I mean Brisk Eagle, which goes up to 20% and affects the officer's troop. Not the greatest, but if you have to use it because it still increases damage. Alright. Increases the damage of this officer's troop by 15%. A very valuable skill from Wings of Glory. And it does a firepower buff for the fighter planes by 30%. Now we got another firepower buff for bombers, up to 30% from Rictus Reaper. And we got another firepower increase of up to 40% from right. I can't remember. Rising Star. Sorry, I got the name mixed up. Now we got increases damage dealt to fighter planes to other fighter planes by 25%, but reduces damage to bombers by 5%, and that is by for Phantom. This is a very valuable skill, and you should be utilizing this skill if you are not using Polar Phantom, because 9 out of 10 times you got to knock out these fighter planes before you got to knock out the bombers in most combat scenarios. In my case, increases damage of this officer's bombers to tanks and helicopters up to 22.5%. This is an insanely valuable skill for both Vanguard and Martyr bombers. And Martyr bombers specifically, because Martyr bombers are already geared for taking out tanks. So this just helps increase it just a little bit. Now, on to Inferno. Increases damage of this officer's troop up to 20%. This is a big deal, and this is a very good one because this one can be used for either fighter planes or bombers. Now, whenever this officer bomber troop sets targets on fire, the fire deals up to 40% more damage. That is a big one, especially when paired with El Cartero, because this means you're going to be doing insane damage numbers and insane tick damage. Now, on to Nagarami, like we had discussed, and I'll also cover Darkwing as well. Now, increases the damages of this officer's troop by up to 20% when attacking an enemy with a shield, increases their troops' damage by an extra 20%. So this is very good when you're going up against other players with Nagarami or also up against um, Witcher. Now, her third skill increases the HP of this officer's fighter planes up to 20% and a damage resist up to 10%. Very good skill, very valuable. But it only applies to fighter planes, so that's the downside. Now, here's the special skill Viper's Cunning. This is a very good one. Whenever this officer's troop is attacked, it has a 20% chance to gain a shield. Shield coefficient of 200 for 2 seconds and can be triggered every 4 seconds. The shield coefficient scales up to 500, which is pretty damn good for a fighter plane. Or, yeah, fighter plane or bomber, if you apply that skill. In effect of this officer's tactics skill at Mac. Oh, wait, I'm not meant to read that. My bad. Oh, wait, we're going to go down to Darkwing. My bad. Error. Second skill Lightning Interception. He gives an intercept buff to fighter planes up to 50%. That is a huge, huge intercept buff, and it's very valuable. Increases the firepower of this officer's troop by up to 20% and its damage up to 10%. Okay, so you're gaining about, I want to say, 12% damage increase from this skill. So that's pretty valuable because it's doing 2 for 1. Now his special. This officer's fighter plane troop has a 30% chance to gain a 6%, scaling up to 20% increased critical strike rate for 4 seconds every time it destroys an enemy aircraft unit. So when I wanted to clarify this real quick. When it says destroy an enemy aircraft unit, that means not full killing a unit. It means every time it knocks an enemy fighter plane out of the unit. Because every unit has 17 fighter plane. Every fighter plane unit has 17 fighter planes. So every time it takes one out of that fighter plane unit, it's gaining that buff, that critical strike rating. So that means he's going to really shred your fighter planes insanely quickly. Now, back to over to Eri Kamamoto and also Warrior Wiz. So we already talked about the Penguin Falcons. Now we're going on to his Master Hacker. Whenever this officer's troop sets an enemy ground force troop, attacks an enemy ground force troop, and has a 15% chance of resetting the target's really low time, and preventing them from attacking for 1 second. Can be triggered once every 8 seconds. Odds of this happening, it goes up to 15% when maxed out. This is a very valuable skill, and I would only really apply this on RLs or light tanks, even, maybe even helicopters, such as the Liberty. Now, his fourth skill increases damage of this officer's troop up to 15%, increases the troop damage by an extra 4.5% if this troop is at least one map grid away from its target. Now, when you're engaging enemies, you should not be right up on their bumper. You should always be at least one map grid away, because the max grid range for all tank units are actually like two map grids, whereas the RL is 3 map grids. So this would be good for RL all units. All units. It's a universal skill. So very handy. You should invest in this skill. Warrior Wiz as a whole should be invested in my opinion, because he's a very good officer. But Iri Kamamoto, not so much. Her faults are in her awakened skill and her tactical skill. But she has a very good, like we said, she has a very good defensive skill that works in hand with Warrior Wiz. Now, her special skill, this officer troop has a 2% chance to dodge enemy incoming attacks, goes up to 8%. Now, this I do not find valuable at all, just because the chance of it happening is very, very low, and I would not invest my officer statues into this. However, increases the damage of this officer's troop up to 15%, and increases damage by an extra 5% if the troop's target has less than 25% HP remaining. This skill I would definitely invest in. So I would invest in our second and our fourth. Now, I apologize. This video was a much longer video than usual, but this was me covering every single skill, telling you guys my point of view through it. So if you managed to watch this video from beginning to end, and in my in-depth analysis of this, I highly appreciate you. Now, we have two Discords. We have the Warpath Lounge Discord, where it's unfiltered, no holds barred action there. So it's the home for you trolls. And then we got Fubar's Lounge, which is where me, Mag, and a few other content creators are there. And it's all serious, all polite. No shits, no bullshitting. It's all about the game. Okay? So if you're interested in either of those Discords, the links will be down in the description below. And if you guys want to make any video requests, or you disagree with what I said in the video, please leave your comments below. It helps me, it helps the channel, and it helps other players. Okay? So, without further ado, this is Fubar signing off. I got your 6. Have a wonderful day. Happy belated Veterans Day. Peace. Oh, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.